Now we know very little of the early life of this gentleman by name Elisha. He happens to be the son of Shaphat. He was born into a prosperous farming family. And so that stands to reason that the work that the family was doing was farming. He was born into a prosperous farming family. Now this gentleman by name Elisha lived in the region of Abel Meholah. And Abel Meholah happens to be an obscure location. And it was a small agricultural town near the dense forest of the Jordan River Valley. Now the great prophet Elijah, after laying out a covenant sense of Israel, was commissioned by God to anoint Elisha as his prophetic successor. At the tail end of the ministry of the prophet Elijah, he was commissioned by God to anoint Elisha as his prophetic successor. And so Elijah headed north from the desert mountain of Horeb. And as he headed north from the desert mountain of Horeb, the word of the Lord says he found this gentleman by name Elisha. And when he found him, it isn't like Elisha was doing nothing. No. When he found him, he was plowing a field with 12 yoke of oxen. Now we are made to understand by the word of the Lord that Elijah threw his cloak on him. And throwing his cloak on Elisha prophetically is a sign of commissioning. When he saw Elisha, the word of the Lord says he threw his cloak, you may also want to call it his mantle, upon the life of Elisha. And I'm telling you tonight that prophetically it means it was a sign of commissioning. And immediately the mantle or the cloak fell on this gentleman by name Elisha. This young man promptly left his plow to follow the prophet of God by name Elijah. But before following him, he sought permission from Elijah that he should permit him to go and kiss his father and his mother. Beloved in the Lord, Elijah, the prophet of God, permitted this gentleman by name Elisha and the newfound prophet marked the beginning of his ministry by laying and slaying the oxen he was plowing with. He made a communal feast, and that communal feast signifies Elisha's unshakable renunciation of his previous way of life. Now, what I want you to understand tonight is that when Elijah saw Elisha, he was doing something. Anyone who has been called by the Lord was doing one thing or the other. Nobody has ever been called by the Lord, whereas that person happened to be seated idle, doing nothing. And so when the prophet Elijah saw this gentleman by name Elisha, he was plowing his field. I have already told you that he comes from a prosperous farming background. The family happens to be a farming family. Now we are made to understand by the word of the Lord that Elisha became the attendant and a disciple of the prophet Elijah. Now the name of Elisha first occurs in chapter 19 of 1 Kings, in the command given to Elijah to anoint him as his successor. And so very little is known about the early life of this gentleman by name Elisha. His name is first and foremost mentioned in the 19th chapter of 1 Kings. Now, as a prophet, Elisha was a political activist. Elisha was a political activist. Not only was he a political activist, he was also a revolutionary. He was also a revolutionary. Now, he led a holy war that extinguished the house of Omri in Jerusalem as well as in Samaria. Now, though Elisha recruited Jehu to revolt against and succeed Ahab, who was anointed by his master Elijah. And the point I'm trying to make here is that it was Elisha who recruited Jehu to revolt against Ahab, thereby succeeding Ahab as a king in the land of Israel. And this gentleman was first and foremost anointed by the master of Elisha by name Elijah. Now we come to terms with the fact that whilst Elijah was passing by, he saw Elijah. Elijah was passing by. He saw Elisha and he threw his mantle on him. And the next thing Elisha did was to follow Elijah. Now tonight I want you to get this revelation. Elijah was passing by. He threw his mantle or his cloak upon Elisha. And the word of the Lord says, immediately Elisha followed Elijah. Now I want you to get this revelation tonight. The spirit of Elisha is a spirit that knows times and seasons. The spirit of Elisha is a spirit that knows times and seasons. You've got to understand that in this world we are living in a world which is having times and seasons. And so if a person lives in this world and the person doesn't know times and seasons, there is no way such a person can make it in life. If a person lives in this world which is made up of times and seasons, what it simply means is that that person will be lagging behind in life. If a person lives in this world which is made up of times and seasons, and the person doesn't know that this world is made up of times and seasons, that person will not be able to make any meaningful impact in life. We are living in a world that is made up of times and seasons. And so if a person lives in this world and the person knows nothing about times and seasons, the person will become a liability. We are living in a world which is made up of times and seasons. And so if a person who lives in this world doesn't know that the world is made up of times and seasons, the person's life wouldn't matter most. We are living in a world which is made up of times and seasons. And so if a person fails to appreciate that person wouldn't be able to go far in life. So the spirit of Elisha is a spirit that knows times and seasons. If you are watching me online, type the word times and seasons. Now watch this, child of God. When Elijah threw his cloak on Elisha, he understood by divine revelation that it was time and season for God to use him to do what he was born to be.